So did I tell you about last night?
No, enlighten me.
Well, after the party, Greg and I finally had sex.
How did that make you feel?
Great. That's why I did it.
So do you always do things because they feel good?
Not always, but I feel fine about it. Animals have sex. It's a natural thing to do.
So, are you saying that humans having sex is no different morally than animals having sex?
Sex is sex.
Then if there is no difference between human and animal sexuality, you should not expect to be treated any different than a sexual animal.
Humans are different than animals, in some ways, but there is nothing wrong with it. I can have sex whenever I choose.
Is there virtue in that choice? Do you think that making a sexual choice is also making an ethical one?
I can do what I want with my body.
Is that not problematic when you take into consideration what sex actually is? There is always at least two agents involved in the sexual act. Don't you think that the other person should be considered in what you do with your body?
You have a point.
In order for you to fully consider the sexual act, you must look at it from the other's perspective. In order for a maximally virtuous sexual act, it cannot be an occasion for the objectification of yourself, of the other, or for mutual objectification. Humans are not objects. Humans are subjects.
What do you mean by virtue? How can sex involve virtue? It is an animalistic activity.
Virtue ethics, since the time of Aristotle, is focused on human flourishing, the well-lived life.
Doesn't great sex lead to human flourishing?
It can, but in a certain context. According to David Carr, it is perfectly permissible for a man to express his sexual desires, just so long as the desires and their expressions occur within an appropriate context, one defined in terms of notions of fidelity, loyalty, love, responsibility, and so on. Some religions, like Christianity, only consider sex appropriate in marriage.
Why does sex need a specific context? I can create my own reasons for sex, I can assure you.
That is a form of relativism. Did you not say earlier that there are some differences between man and animal? Are these unique features of humanity different for each man, or are they universal among all men?
All men want to have sex, but I also think they all want to be respected. Something like the golden rule.
Ah. Aristotle talks about the golden mean, which is the desired middle point between two opposing extremes. In the case of sex, what do you think the golden mean would be?
Not too much sex, and certainly not abstinence.
That would be one of the four cardinal virtues, temperance. Sexual temperance is restraining from sex at the right times, and having it when the occasion is proper. But don't you see a form of virtue in abstinence? Can it be considered a special moral act?
If it is, I don't want a part in it.
Going back to our discussion of context, for abstinence to be considered an act of supererogation, it must be looked at from all angles. You must ask why the person is remaining chaste, and consider why it would be an act that is going above and beyond the call of virtue.
Why would anyone want to be chaste?
According to Pope John Paul II, the essence of chastity consists in quickness to affirm the value of the person in every situation, and raising to the personal level all reactions to the value of the body and sex. Not only is there an inherent value of persons, but there is virtue in our reaction to the human body, and to sex.
When you mentioned Pope, I was skeptical, but that definition makes sense. So why is sex moral?
Sexual activity affects a person not merely in the moment of satisfaction, but on a deeper level that touches the psychological, emotional, and even spiritual aspects of man. Sex is perhaps the most personal act in which one can participate with another. It is a communion of two people at the most intimate level possible. There is a dignity to the human person, and that dignity should be affirmed at all times, especially in the sexual act.
I have never thought that way before. This was interesting.
I told you ethics class is fun. Can you believe that I got to research this topic for my paper?
I am switching my major to philosophy.